Basin Electric was built because of a growing membership. Cooperatives needed more electricity, and so they pulled together. They formed a generation and transmission electric cooperative that today serves 3 million members across 9 states. Their mission remains the same. From adding generation and transmission resources to ensure the system is reliable and secure, to finding new ways to work within a regional transmission organization and market. Staff is working to ensure the cooperative is getting the most value out of its resources. Basin Electric is innovative and resourceful in serving the membership. Built to serve, supporting membership growth.
Well, good afternoon as well. I feel like maybe it's time for a story to kind of enlighten things, but all the jokes I can remember came from Jerry Hammerquist, and those that know him know I can't tell them here. The supporting membership growth panel will also feature 3 senior staff members. Mike Risen, Senior Vice President of Transmission, Dave Rotz, Senior Vice President of Resource Planning, and Ken Rutter, Senior Vice President of Marketing and Asset Management. Each panelist will give you some brief comments just like before, and of course we have the mics. So first up, Dave.
Thank you, Vic, and good afternoon, everybody. When you talk about members supporting member growth, first thing I think about is what is the membership's load growth? You know, that's what we're basically building the resources on. See if I can get the thing here to work. I guess each year we create or work with the membership to develop a brand new load forecast. This chart shows where our membership's load forecast was for 2016, and then the new load forecast that we had as of January 2017. You can see that we did forecast a bit of a decrease. Commodity pricing is having an impact on the rate of growth within the Basin Electric membership. But that's not necessarily a bad story either. With our 2017 load forecast, we're still forecasting about 1% annual load growth per year for the next 20 years, and that equates to almost 1,000 megawatts of load growth. I think this is somewhat of a unique story with a lot of the utilities in the United States. By and large, the majority of Basin members are continuing to grow. Based on that 2017 load forecast, we've evaluated the amount of resources that Basin Electric either owns or we have contracted at the current time. And based on that forecast, we have existing resources to meet the membership's peak load, reserves, and the financial and the losses on the transmission system out to the periods of time shown on this graph. Generally, we've got a lot of resources available to serve your load out through the year 2023 to 24 time period. Each year, we evaluate what the market is, and we evaluate what the cost of building new resources are. And through this RFP, or request for proposal, we go out and we look at, should we be buying resources or should we be considering building resources? And we'll be issuing another one of these RFPs here next spring. Based on the last 3 or 4 years worth of RFPs, Basin Electric has bought quite a bit of capacity in the market to serve the growing membership's needs. This chart represents the magnitude of those capacity purchases. You can see in 2018, that's a pretty significant number in the 800 megawatt range. So we've been taking advantage of capacity purchases in the market in lieu of building a lot of the resources that we need. Yes, we have built some gas peaking resources from a reliability perspective, but we have been buying in the market to help keep membership rates low. We've been trying to create what I would say is a positive thing, a cliff event. And through our power purchases in the market, we've been creating that cliff event out in that 2023 or 24 time period. This is the period where we've been seeing this tipping point. Prior to that, it made economic sense to buy in the market. After that, it seemed to make sense to buy or build new resources. And again, we'll be evaluating this in the spring, and it's my expectation we'll be able to buy additional capacity in the market to extend that cliff event and delay the need to build new resources for Basin Electric. In 2018, we've also been working with the membership on some rate structure objectives. This isn't a major overhaul of our rate structure, but we've been trying to support member marketing efforts and also to increase the load management levels and activities of the membership. I think one of the primary rate structure changes is the demand period waiver. And I'm real happy to say that the Basin Electric Board yesterday agreed to guarantee the rate or demand period waiver out through the year 2020 to help support membership load growth and increase load management. We also had some discussions with the Managers Advisory Committee and the Rate Subcommittee about starting a more major rate strategic planning discussion. What should our rate structure look like into the future? And it was determined that now probably isn't the appropriate time to engage in this discussion because it would tend to have potential rate shifts from one member to the other. And we didn't think this was an appropriate time to engage in that discussion. To end with, I'd like to talk a little bit about consumer options. And this is a topic of a lot of discussion within the membership. With low energy and capacity market prices, some of our large industrial consumers would like access to the market. We're monitoring that, getting legal advice as far as what those options are, and staff continues to work with the membership, external consultants, concerning the economics of consumer self-generation. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Reisen.
Well, you just heard Dave talk about our load growth and the generation plan to meet that growth. A key component of supporting membership growth is the delivery of generation to that load. One of the key areas of significant member growth requiring major infrastructure additions the last several years has been in the Basin area in western North Dakota and eastern Montana. As we near that build-out, I'm pleased to report that through a team effort of partners old and new, we have reliably supported membership growth. The comparison of the next two slides showing the development of the transmission system in the Basin from 2008 to 2017 illustrates the significant additions required to serve that area. These additions will leave us well positioned for the future. Throughout this journey, the Transmission System Maintenance Division has been instrumental in commissioning and checkout of new facilities in addition to their ongoing responsibilities of maintaining our existing system. The TSM team took on one of the largest projects in TSM history in responding to a notice to construct by the SPP board to reconduct the Minot Southwest to Berthold 115 kV line. This line was put back in service on October 19th. Other more routine TSM highlights for 2017 include a refurbishment project at Dickinson Substation in western North Dakota and breaker replacements at Leland Olds and Laramie River. The backbone of the build-out was the AVS to Nessa 345 kV project that you heard Matt Greek mention earlier. This project will be fully in service before year's end, on time, and under budget. This project was a key component of our decision to join the Southwest Power Pool. Now that we have been a member of SPP for over 2 years, I am absolutely convinced that we made the right decision to join SPP for the benefit of the membership. A big piece of that decision is the SPP culture and philosophy you heard Nick Brown talk about this morning. The SPP culture of relationship building is totally in line with our cooperative family values. Given that success on the east, we have, along with our neighbors on the west, been exploring the prospect of bringing our west side facilities into SPP as well. That group, as Nick Brown noted, is calling itself the Mountain West Transmission Group, and it includes Tri-State and WAPA. A key component of the Mountain West proposal is to integrate and optimize the DC ties between Mountain West and SPP into a single market solution, and you'll hear more from Ken on this proposal. Before I turn this over to Ken, though, there's one more 2017 topic I need to address, and that is regarding our collective NERC compliance program with the membership. This past year, a number of our members with bulk electric system facilities subject to the mandatory NERC reliability standards stepped up and explicitly registered with NERC. This milestone decision will reduce our regulatory risk for our cooperative family, and for that I'd like to say thank you to the membership. With that, I'll now turn it over to Ken to share the key role the marketing group plays in supporting membership growth.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. So our motto is built to serve, and in a moment I'll talk about some of the advantages the generation assets Basin has in the marketplace. But in today's world, where we see these large swings in energy and commodity prices, changes in environmental and reliability regulations, and last but not least, things like the wind tax subsidies, we need market access more than ever. Basin's large geographic footprint has always positioned us in different markets. Currently, we have the bulk of our load and assets in SPP, but we also have load and assets in MISO and in WEC on the west, which is currently outside of an RTO. The SPP and MISO RTOs provide the much-needed market access to maximize the value of our generation assets and more cost-effectively serve our member loads. Due to the tax subsidies, wind generation has continued to increase in the market, but this hasn't been offset with a corresponding increase in loads. So there are times when we have a lot of surplus energy in the marketplace from the wind that we can purchase power from the market at cheaper costs than we can generate. On the flip side, when the wind isn't blowing, we then have the opportunity to capture additional value from our generating assets from surplus sales. Basin's plan, as Mike mentioned, is to extend these RTO benefits to the west, where we currently have a surplus position. With the elimination of pancake transmission charges, we should be able to sell our surplus at a higher value in an SPP West. The Mountain West Transmission Group joining SPP should help Basin save on our SPP administrative fees, allow us to better utilize our generation fleet, continue to delay our future capacity needs, and help with cost allocations for the DC ties. The SPP market will provide a single dispatch solution for the east and west across those DC ties, and we have access to those DC ties. And with the rights we'd retain with the proposal we have with the Mountain West Transmission Group, this could provide additional value for Basin's members. Within the RTO landscape, we're shifting Basin's market philosophy from availability to profitability. John touched on that a little bit earlier. Basin's generation is offered into the market and competes against other generators in SPP and MISO. This arrangement forces our generators to keep costs low. Our units are and can continue to be cost competitive. Most of our coal generation assets, our mine mouth, are closely located to coal reserves, as this graphic highlights. This allows us to avoid significant fuel transportation costs that other coal generators in SPP face. Additionally, another key benefit our North Dakota coal generation has is sharing the coal mine with Dakota gasification. This provides fuel synergies and helps keep the fuel costs low. This next graphic highlights some of the competitive advantages of our gas-fired generation assets. The geographic proximity of the peaking assets at Lonesome Creek, Pioneer, and Culbertson to the Bakken allow them to have a cheaper variable cost than other gas units in the marketplace. At times, we've seen that this can be up to 30 cents an MMBTU versus natural gas prices in southern SPP in the mid-continent region. This translates to about a $2.50 per megawatt hour advantage from a variable cost perspective. Plus, with our DGC affiliate, we essentially cap our exposure for Groton and Deer Creek, which are further down the Northern Border Pipeline. While not as significant as our coal assets, we still capture value through surplus sales from these natural gas assets, and they're valuable in times to serve our load. Basin's portfolio of generation also includes a substantial volume of wind assets. This graphic highlights the location of Basin's wind generation versus the high-intensity wind corridor in the United States. Nick Brown referred to this morning as the Saudi Arabia of wind. As you can see, our large wind presence is within this corridor, which tends to run north to south with SPP. So all the wind generation in SPP has this competitive advantage. And there's times we know today where the wind can potentially negatively impact the value of our coal generation. But Basin has been positioning itself for the long term in a carbon-constrained world, and the long-term advantage of having these wind resources in close proximity to our loads should help reduce the energy costs. But as we've seen, the world is very dynamic, and competition won't be letting up anytime soon. While our assets are competitive now, they must remain that way into the future to extend their lives as long as possible. Shifting to another marketing area, DGC is introducing 2 new products to its already diverse commodity mix. As you've already heard, DEF and urea. Each of these new products will provide enhanced margins over the ammonia feedstock and will help improve DGC's financial bottom line. These 2 products will also lead to better value for the existing ammonia plant, as we now expect it to operate more continuously and a higher capacity factor more efficiently. Demand for these products is strong, and marketing is ready, positioned, and eager to get these products to market. DGC's urea plant is geographically located in a great spot. This graphic highlights where some of the other production facilities in North America are located. Demand for urea and ammonia within a 200-mile radius of our plant well exceeds our production capabilities. While these other North American production facilities have been brought online, our geographic location still provides a competitive advantage due to the logistical freight and transportation costs involved in getting their product to our area. So we'll continue to explore how to get the highest netback margin possible with our marketing strategy, but we do know we won't have a problem selling the urea we can produce. I'd like to close by saying it's been an honor to work with the membership, with Paul's staff, and every day it's a privilege to work with the great marketing group. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Vic for some questions.
Thank you, guys. I've got some canned questions, but it's probably more important that your questions get answered. So I'm going to start really back to a question that was just asked of the last panel. Ken, would you address the urea pricing issue and how that affected our study?
Right. Some of the financing staff, Kimberly Miller and Susan Sorensen, pulled that information for us in between the panels. And urea pricing that was used in the modeling of the 5% IRR was, for 2018, $289. The current market for urea is about $315. So, actually the market currently supporting a little bit higher level. Over the full term that they analyzed, the average price was about $330. So some conservative numbers in terms of the urea pricing that was used to support that 5%.
Okay, remember, step up to the mic and ask the questions. So I'll start with one for Dave. You kind of finished your presentation a little bit of talking about self-generation. Where do you see that break-even point, and what happens to those of us left holding the bag?
Yeah, this is a topic, Vic, that we've been talking with the membership for quite a while. I think at one point, about a year ago, we thought might be 800 megawatts a load at risk. It came down. Folks want access to the market. Some folks want to put self-generation in. I think at this point, we've reviewed access to the market probably isn't a real option in the Basin service territory for the end consumer from a legal perspective. We have seen a few ethanol plants start down the road for self-generation. I think they're in kind of a unique situation. They have waste heat on the site, and so they have a lot of the infrastructure there already doing fuel switching. One of the areas that we are doing quite a bit of review on and looking at is what might happen out some of the big energy loads out in western North Dakota. And so as far as a break-even price, Basin, resource planning, engineering staff have looked at that. At the current levels of Basin's rates, we don't think we're at a lot of risk. But again, it's getting very close. Basin's rates, when the members' rates are getting close to that point, we are going down the road to hire an external consultant to help us get a consumer's perspective, and we're reevaluating it, keeping a very close eye on it. As far as the impact to the overall membership, since we are forecasting load growth throughout the membership, I don't know if we're going to have a lot of negative impacts on the overall general Basin rate. Again, it would be dependent on how much potentially we could lose and how fast it could come. Something we're monitoring very closely with the membership.
Sounds like we have our first question out here.
Yes, you're talking about a 200-mile radius, and what % market product up in a 200-mile radius?
So the demand, a couple responses to that. The demand in our core area in that 200-mile radius well exceeds what we can produce now at the urea plant. So with a 360,000 ton urea forecast in an area that has over potentially a couple million ton demand, so we'll well exceed that. In terms of our market share, I can only refer to currently what we have with our ammonia, where we have in our core area about 40% market share. We're hoping to grow that with time, with differences in some of the that we're hoping to come out of this fertilizer marketing study that we're working on in terms of maybe a different customer mix and how we can achieve a higher market share. Does that address the question?
DEF market, what are you looking at for that? And are you packaging that in what size containers, or what are you doing, selling bulk or what?
We sell bulk. We'll be selling bulk. The DEF will take a little bit longer to work into. We have the ability to produce over 60 million gallons of DEF with the new facility. We're forecasting next year probably along the line of about 20 million gallons of sales. And it's not necessarily that we couldn't produce all the way up to the 60 million, it's just that the market hasn't developed fully yet. So the plant was sized such that we can grow into that demand that we're expecting to increase over the next several years.
Hey, good questions. Mike, I got one for you. Basin transmission assets are spread throughout the system. Where do you have crews, and how does that, transmission at Basin differ from what we're used to in the distribution world?
Well, you're right, Vic. Our assets are spread across a large geographic system. We actually have 3 different transmission systems that those assets support. We've got the assets that are dispersed throughout what was the IS, the integrated system, the joint transmission system with WAPA and with Heartland, which has since been turned over to SPP for their control. That's what we call the Upper Missouri Zone within SPP. We also have assets in our common use area, which is Northeast Wyoming. That's a joint arrangement with Powder River Energy Corporation and Black Hills Power. And then we have our share of the facilities associated with the Missouri Basin Power Project. To support the maintenance of those assets that we own, we've got 11 different facilities spread across 4 states. We have 4 facilities within North Dakota at Mandan, Beulah, Logan, and Williston. In South Dakota, we also have 4 facilities at Gettysburg, Groton, Watertown, and Broadland. We have 1 facility at Stegall, Nebraska, supporting those facilities, and we have 2 in Wyoming, basically at Gillette and at Wheatland. With respect to the question about the differences between distribution and the facilities that our guys maintain, I think the biggest difference is just the size and the scope what we're dealing with. At the distribution level, you're probably dealing more with 50 to 70 foot type tall structures, primarily wood poles. The facilities that our guys have to maintain are more in the 120 to 170 foot range, and therefore you can imagine that the equipment to support that also is a lot bigger. Also, our stuff would be mostly steel. We do have some limited wood, but those are the primary differences.
Hey, I seem to remember last year you actually did Liveline.
Oh, yes.
How'd that feel?
That's another thing that I probably should have mentioned as a difference, just because of the difficulty getting construction outages, particularly when we had the significant load growth in the Basin. We try to do as much stuff as we can hot, bare hand, and as Vic noted, I did have the opportunity to go out with the guys and get energized at 3:45, so that was kind of a highlight of my career. Another thing I should have mentioned with respect to differences is with regard to NERC compliance. Since our facilities are generally higher voltage, 230 kV and above, there's different requirements such as vegetation management that our membership distribution co-ops likely wouldn't have to deal with. And then also just from a safety perspective, working in substations, just have to be cautious in terms of, we're doing work in those substations when other areas of the sub are energized. So just have to make sure we take all the necessary planning and precautions to make sure our folks come home safe at the end of the day.
Else out there, I'll keep going. Ken, try to explain the difference between marketing electricity and marketing our fertilizer commodities and all the other commodities we have out of DGC.
Okay, we'll spend the next hour talking about...
I'll cut you off.
Okay. Now, there's as many similarities as there are differences. The main difference on the power side, of course, is you can't store power, and that's why we have a real-time desk for power management, and that's unique versus the other commodities. But all the commodities do have the same type of transportation, I should call it, logistical type issues that we have to coordinate when we're marketing the product, whether it be transporting by truck or rail, or through a natural gas pipeline, or over the wires. With all the commodities, we try to have a diverse customer base so that we're never really kind of tied to one particular product or market segment, and we spread it around. I think the big reason, though, why Basin centralized the commodity management was to get the synergies that we have across the Basin family, meaning DGC produces natural gas. We now have a bunch of natural gas-fired generation that consumes natural gas. It made sense to kind of pull those things together. At the same time, on a daily basis, when prices are volatile, we want to have the flexibility and be ready if there's a different value, higher value for natural gas or for fertilizer or for our tar oil, that we can do some of the product switching and kind of set that up right for DGC on a daily basis.
Understand we have a question way in the back. Go ahead.
Yes, my question is with EV growth in the future, is that being modeled in at all with your projections? And then second part of that, anything looking into the future for a smart grid with all these connected vehicles being able to be utilized?
Dave, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I guess I can talk about the electric vehicles, and when you think about the future, I look at potential electric cars, things like that, almost like what Uber did to some of the taxi companies. Basically, consumers are going to make the investment in the electric cars. They're going to have the batteries, and I think the utilities in their area are going to take advantage of that. They're going to use the output of those electric batteries, and they're going to charge those electric batteries at their discretion. Basically, down the road, I see that my wife's car in the garage, she can tell the power company what price she'd like to discharge that battery back into the electric grid. We'll get paid for that. And what price she'd like to charge her car. And what does that all mean? It means that it's going to stabilize the electric prices across the electrical grid. And I think that's a very positive thing that'll ultimately come from electric cars. It also builds load, and that's not a bad thing, especially if you can charge those cars during the low price periods. Add a lot of stability. I think it'll also help avoid new resource expansion for a number of the utilities.
I think it also was built into kind of the thought process in Basin joining SPP and having that market access, because on a standalone basis to be able to manage and accommodate some of these changes that are coming and the rapid changes that are coming over the next decade or so. We needed to be able to be in position in something like SPP to be able to handle that.
What if I want to take him first? Just because you run around and direct everything. We'll go over here first.
All right. All three of you guys up there with Dave and Mike and Ken. Dave, you and I have been talking for the last couple of years on self-generation unit. We're at the final stages with our ethanol plant of about a 4.5 megawatt unit. They keep beating us up. You and I were talking at dinner time out here on the pricing of where we're at. I guess I'm kind of curious for all three of you. You know, Dave, you talked about the consultant that you're looking at for doing some analysis on our rate structure for where we're at Basin. Will that include kind of a review as to how competitive we are with the other utilities? Because it's going to kind of tie into, I'll appreciate your comments on that. And then with Mike and Ken, with Mike a little bit on the SPP market, one of our co-ops in the eastern South Dakota is finding that the SPP is allowing the ability to wheel in power to some of our loads that are capable of being bid over 2 megawatts. And if we're not competitive on Ken's side on the energy costs that we have out there, are we going to be able to compete with these when they have access through the SPP market to wheel the power in and be able to do that? What are we doing from a competitive standpoint from the SPP market to make sure that we're protecting ourselves out there for our membership as a whole for them large loads? And then Ken on the self-generation unit from the aspect of just being competitive.
That's a lot of questions there. Concerning the economics of self-generation and what are we looking at there today, and a person always has to be real careful how you phrase this to the end consumer versus, in a group like this where we're talking about the power suppliers. Today with the rule set that's there, a consumer really doesn't have access to the market. So it gets to be a question, can he produce electricity at a price that is lower than what he can buy from the electric utility? That's where our primary concern is today, unless there's a legislative change. That's what we're focusing on as we look at that. An ethanol plant, I think, is in a real unique situation where they do have a certain amount of waste heat. So what that means is they can capture some of that waste heat without putting a lot of extra fuel expense. They don't incur that natural gas cost. And so that's where it is somewhat economical for them to supply some of their load, which is allowed by legislation. When you do that, though, there's also another factor that comes in. If they just want to have a single generator to serve their load, and they're going to rely on the utilities to back that up, that means that Basin Electric is still going to, and the members, are going to have to maintain transmission capability to get to that load so that the poles and the wires and the infrastructure is there to support it during their unit outages. And so that's where we have a standby charge or a standby rate. And it's always a difficult discussion with the end consumer to talk about why that's appropriate. As another alternative, they can isolate from the grid, and there's usually some unique challenges with that. As far as the second part of that, are we comparing it to other utilities rates? That's not the scope that we're engaged in now. We did do that a few years ago, kind of compared Basin's members' rates to the other neighboring IOUs. Generally, our rates are a little higher. We serve a lower density type of area. There's more infrastructure that's there, and generally our costs are a little higher than maybe some of the more urban areas. But again, with territorial laws, it really gets to be what is a consumer's options versus buying electricity from utilities or self-generating?
Brad, I think the question that you directed to me was with respect to the Southwest Power Pool and us joining SPP. I would just comment that with FERC Order 888, we already had the obligation to open up our transmission systems on a wholesale basis for anybody that wanted to use that. And by joining SPP, what we did is that we just enjoined or went in with others likely situated. So if you were here this morning and heard Nick talk about it, basically that's like one-stop shopping for use of that transmission system or access to that system. So it did eliminate pancaking, if you will, if that was an impediment before to get to various loads. I think you're talking probably more so at the retail level, and I think that comes down to what the individual state laws are. But on a interstate perspective, open access perspective, all we did is open up our transmission system on a bit of a broader basis than what we were with the IS. You'd mentioned market. I think I'll defer to Ken on that to do the actual market activity of how that interplays with this. But the access on the transmission system, we already had that obligation. It's just on a broader basis now that we joined SPP.
So the SPP market is like any other market. It balances out supply and demand. And right now, the market has been kind of subverted by two things: very low natural gas prices and these wind tax subsidies. The wind tax subsidies have really messed up the supply picture in the marketplace. There's just more energy there than needs to be at times, and that's kept prices low. But we can't forget that this is just a point in time, and the market has had other supply gluts at periods of time that it's worked through. I think our units are very competitive. Kind of went through some of those highlights in my presentation, but John, the operations group, is working very hard to keep the cost down, the variable costs and incremental costs that we offer those units into the marketplace low, so that they can remain competitive and continue to keep their lives extended as long as possible. In terms of others kind of trying to kind of wheel into our area and kind of undercut us, the way the SPP market works is there's three parts to the pricing. There's energy, congestion, and losses. And that congestion component is essentially what creates the differential between a generator's price and a load's price in the marketplace. And at times it can be fairly significant. We would love to move some of our surplus energy from up here in the north actually down to the south. That's a more premium market down to the south. We'd like to do some of that similar, where you're talking about others coming into our area, we'd like to move it into other areas. But congestion has prevented us from being able to successfully do that. There are some natural barriers with how the transmission system is structured, as well as the market, that prevent a total undercutting of some of the normal dynamics of the supply and demand.
You've been patiently waiting, Mike. And you know how hard it is to remember your question for that long?
Well, at least I remembered you were standing there.
Yeah, thanks. So I think Ken did a really good job talking about how a glut in supply of wind has impacted the markets. But from just a straight comparison perspective, maybe Dave could talk to us about the wind and gas bids that you're seeing. Compare that to our cost of coal generation from the variable cost, and just how competitive are we, notwithstanding a supply glut in the market?
Well, I guess there's really two facets to the competitiveness of our resources. One of those, I think, is where Ken really deals with on a day-to-day basis. What is that economic comparison of our resources? And when we do that, we talk about what is our incremental cost, or what is that cost to produce the next kilowatt hour. And today, I think Basin's coal plants and gas plants are pretty competitive with the market. There's some times when we're not, but like Ken's slides showed, we've got a lot of our coal assets are right by or are located by the gas or by the coal fields. Some of our gas plants are located in areas where there's depressed gas prices. So on a short-term basis, I think our plants are adding to the margin. The second aspect of that comes to more of the long-term perspective, and that's when you start to bring in both the interest and the depreciation as well as the fuel cost, and that's an area where the folks in resource planning look at what are those best long-term alternatives. And as we look at that, you say, should we retire a plant? Should we keep those plants running? What are the new resource alternatives? Ultimately, when you talk about the new resource alternatives, wind and gas looks pretty competitive today to building other types of resources. There's always issues if you need to do something with an existing plant. You've got all the sunk costs of that asset. But it's a very complicated process, Mike. You have to break it into the day-to-day short-term periods. That's got a whole different economics. If Ken can produce 1 extra megawatt hour, bring dollars that increase the margin, that's a good thing. From a long-term resource perspective, how do you meet load growth? There we need to factor in the total cost of the asset, both the fixed cost and the variable cost. So hope that answers your question.
I think we have one back over here somewhere.
Yeah, my question, I guess, is with the urea plant and your urea sales, like most retailers have their urea booked already, so have you made or contracted any sales, or what is your plan for moving urea?
We have not formally contracted any sales at this point in time, but we are very close to making some sales. We have customers who are lined up to take the product, so they know that the plant is going to be coming online shortly, and they know the kind of the levels we'll be able to produce, and so we're not concerned about being able to move the product for this spring.
Over here.
Vic, I don't know, this is kind of going off with different direction, but something Ken said a little bit ago, and it's probably more for Mike too. The Mountain West Transmission Group, does that group involve like Excel? I mean, I know it involves us, Basin, Tri-State, but to get to that Excel market that's in the Denver area where Ken can, where we can get some of our cheaper power into those, I just wondered, is Excel in on those talks and that kind of stuff?
The parties that have been involved in the Mountain West conversation have been 2 co-ops, Basin and Tri-State. It's been 2 WAPA projects, the Loveland area projects and the Colorado River storage projects, CRISP. 2 municipal entities, Colorado Springs Utilities and Platte River Power Authority, and 2 investor-owned utilities, which would be PSCO, which is an operating company of XL, and also Black Hills Power, and they've got 3 different operating companies, if you will, under that umbrella. I'm hopeful that we can make this happen, just like Nick said this morning, but I will tell you that it's been a much different process than when the IS joined. When the IS joined, we had 3 parties that were contractually linked through the IS agreements, had worked together for 50 years through the Missouri Basin Systems Group, and then we converted that joint transmission system to the FERC Pro Forma integrated system is what we called it. So we had a strong working relationship, kind of common interests, and contractually linked. With Mountain West, you've got these 8 different entities working together, so a lot of the conversation has been just negotiating amongst ourselves as to what we needed to proceed. We initially started with a conversation of just trying to have a joint tariff similar to what the IS was, and that ultimately morphed into a realization that to achieve all the benefits or the full benefits of working together, that participation in a full RTO and the market benefits, if we didn't do that, we'd be leaving something on the table. We also recognize, with your question with respect to access to markets, there are others in the West that are interested in access. Right now, the only organized market on the West is the California ISO. The Mountain West group did consider California ISO as an option, but they've got a problem with their governance model in that it's California-centric, and that just was a non-starter for the rest of us. So we did look at SPP, we considered MISO, we considered PJM to administer those services on our behalf. And very pleased that the SPP did bubble to the top in that analysis. And one of the primary reasons is because of the proximity and the DC ties and the ability to optimize on each side of that east-west electrical separation. If we can make the Mountain West project go forward, there's others to the southwest that we know are waiting at the door. We're hopeful that there's others to the north and northwest that might also be able to join that club for further benefits, for a further win-win for all the parties involved.
Got any more back there, Greg?
Maybe Vic, I could just follow up on that too. And you know, one of the real advantages from a long-term power supply perspective on Mountain West is the elimination of multiple transmission wheeling paths. You know, today we have excess generation in the west, and we're moving quite a bit of the power from Laramie River Station and the Dry Fork Station from the west over to the east, so we don't have to build new resources on the east to serve some of that load growth. Today, we have to pay a west side wheeling. We have to pay a wheeling cost to go across the DC ties, and then we also have to pay a wheeling expense to, to serve the load on the east. In Mountain West, like Nick Brown said, it's kind of a one-shop wheeling. And all we'll have to do is pay for the wheeling to serve our load on the east. And so we eliminate some of that pancaked wheeling. So that's one of the other real advantages of a Mountain West SPP connection.
Ken, I got kind of one final one here for you. DOE has been in the news a lot for their proposed rule on essentially propping up baseload generation. On the surface, you would think for us that'd be a good deal. What's your opinion of that? Good idea, bad idea?
Well, the proposal from the DOE to FERC has some challenges, and there's a lot of questions around it, some uncertainty. As we understand it, the challenges with it are that the market that it would apply to has to have a viable capacity market. SPP doesn't necessarily have a capacity market, so we're not even sure if it would apply to our base load generation in SPP. So we've got some clarifying questions on that. Part of the other problem with it, though, from the challenges is the proposal, as we understood it, would essentially force all the fixed costs of a generator to be recovered from the whole marketplace. So it's essentially the entire market subsidizing those fixed costs, and that's not how the RTO market models were necessarily designed. What we'd really like to see is the base load generation that we have, or the coal generation that we have, be compensated fairly in the marketplace for those times when we have to remain on at minimums when there's too much wind in the marketplace and those LMP prices in the market have dropped below our generating cost, but that unit has to be there and available so that tomorrow when the wind isn't there, it has to be there to generate. So we're kind of calling that essentially a standby recovery, for that cost, so that we're made whole for those periods of time when we have to be there ready and waiting. It's a little bit different from how the rule was proposed. The rule as proposed seems to be a little bit more favored towards merchant or IPP generators to try to recover their fixed costs when they don't have any other mechanism to do that, and that's not necessarily a good thing as it's currently written.
Any other questions out there? Well, I'm going to finish this group with the same question as the last group. And I think, Dave, you already used your answer, so you're going to have to come up with something else. Where do you see Basin and the family in 10 to 20 years?
Well, I guess I'd have maybe three different things. I guess one, power supply. Will our power supply today be the same as our power supply 10, 20 years from now? I don't think so. We're going to continue to diversify. I think you're going to see batteries as a part of that. You're probably going to see solar as the part of that. But again, it all comes back to the economics and, for that. But I think there will be a change in the power supply makeup. Concerning rates, kind of two facets with that. Been around at Basin for a long time. And I look back into the 80s and when Basin's rates were really high. We talked about death spiral and all the bad things about losing load. And then we moved into a period of time when our rates were real low. I think we're going to see those type of cycles again over the next 10 to 20 years. I think I'm hopeful and I believe that collectively as we work together, we're going to tend to be on the average of the low side of the rates and not on the high side of those rates compared to other alternatives. The third thing, I'd venture a comment on membership. And look at the group here. Look at the magnitude of people here and look at the dialogue that we're having, and I see us collectively, or the replacement and the people that come back into the cooperative system, working together to come up with a solution to keep us going.
I'm going to answer from a transmission perspective because that's what I do, and I'm optimistic that we're going to make this Mountain West arrangement work with Southwest Power Pool. I also would see that that will be just the tip of the iceberg on the West, and I think that'll be an opportunity for others to join that, and I think that'll position our generation, the marketing side and the long-term generation side of the house positioned well to serve our member load at the least possible cost by eliminating some of those transmission barriers.
I'll answer it three different ways: technology, people, and the membership. And on the technology side, Matt Greek spoke to this in the earlier panel. How I see it, actually, things like batteries and electric vehicles impacting us is kind of a flattening of the load shape and kind of maybe flattening of the price through time, because that's going to cause shifts in the loads and different things. On the people side, I think you'll see Basin Electric in 10 years, it's going to be a much more efficient workforce that's using technology to do things in different ways. And so I think we'll see continued improvements on that side. From the membership perspective, I think along with the technology, we'll have to have a very close working relationship in groups like marketing and resource planning, working with the members to accommodate for these new things that are going to develop in the marketplace. You heard Nick Brown this morning talk about these collective, microgrids, and maybe it's 10,000 phones or something that are kind of participating in some sort of new rate or structure. You're going to have that tied back to, the most efficient times to utilize those types of services. So I think Basin will have to continue to work with the membership and have a close relationship with the member through time.
There was a piece here on the script that was written that talked about the co-op model being nimble and ready to meet these challenges. I would take exception to that, and that is because there's nothing nimble about the co-op model. We're built from the ground up with a member base that is here for the long haul. Like the slogan today is, it's built to serve. So thank these guys for all their dedication, and we'll turn it over to the next group.
Vic, one last point. I was notified that, back to the question on the urea, Finance will have some of the IRR information available in the membership segment tomorrow. So just wanted to pass that along.
I thought you were coming up with something else. Going to talk again for another. We got 5 more minutes. You want that floor yet? I could ask you the question that Val gave me.
I'm done.
Thank you, everybody.